Okay, welcome back to Heads and Tails. My name's Henry Faber. I'm one of the co-founders here at Oppenheimer Education, and I feel really lucky as a big admirer of big education to have Liz Robinson with us today. Liz is, in really simple terms, a school and system leader. She works to redefine how education is delivered in England and has been involved in all sorts of amazing projects in recent years. She was formerly head teacher of Surrey Square in Southwark for 13 years, and then in 2018, Liz co-founded Big Education. Big Education is essentially a MAT. It's a multi-academy trust, and it's a charity that is working to transform the education system and to ensure that young people received a balanced education of the head. That's the academic part, the heart, character and well-being, and then the hand, problem-solving, creativity, and making a difference. I know that Liz is interested in developing values-led leadership. That's a big thing, and has worked extensively as a speaker, trainer, and coach. She's passionate about asking bigger questions about what school can, or perhaps what it should actually be. Couldn't think of a more timely time to have a discussion about that. Liz, thank you, and welcome to Heads and Tails.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me. It's delightful to be here.
Good. So you may know a little bit about Oppenheimer Education. We're obsessed with all things mentorship. That's our on guiding light and our North Star. I'd love to hear your perspectives on mentoring. Did you have a mentor? Do you have one now? Any perspectives you can share on mentorship?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've got lots of mentors and act as a mentor to other people. I think it's an incredibly powerful role. I'm also obsessed with coaching. So I think the difference and the space between them is really important. Actually, on Saturday, I was at the memorial for Sir Tim Brighouse, which was a gathering of kind of lots and lots of education people all in one space. And Steve Mumby was talking about how he had asked Sir Tim to be a mentor to him. And Tim had made that distinction, said, I'm not going to be a coach. I'm not going to be agnostic. I want to be a mentor. I want to tell you what I think. I want to give you my opinion. So there was kind of a nice distinction. And I feel blessed that I've had incredible mentors who saw my potential, I suppose, at an early career stage and have nurtured me. And I suppose one of the things that strikes me is partly about sort of this idea of sponsorship. So one of my mentors, Sir David Bell, who's had an eye on me since I was first a head teacher at the age of 29, because he also was a head teacher at the age of 29. But by that stage, he was in the Department of Education. But he mentored me, but he's also sponsored me in the sense of I just was part of the David Bell Early Years Review for Bridget Phillipson's team, because he's known me all that time and was like, right, we need Liz on that group. So it's amazing how the different roles that those kind of mentors can play. And I suppose the other thing is, for me, is about hard times. So yes, they might give you opportunity, they might inspire you, but I've had a really tricky couple of years with various challenges, and having those people who at the end of the phone or even at the end of a WhatsApp just to say, feeling a bit rubbish, or this hard thing's happened, could we have a chat, or even just to sort of, hang on in there, remember what matters, they're very important figures, I think, when you're trying to do hard things.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you. What a great kickoff. I mean, your reflections on the coaching mentoring difference, we get asked about it all the time. And It's why I'm a big believer that mentoring and that slightly more directive approach is really important with children and young people in schools. Perhaps we can take you back to school. What were you like? Maybe there's an anecdote that gives us a little bit of a perspective on what the young Liz was like before you left education.
Yeah. Young Liz was very fastidious and worked very hard, and was always kind of keen to do well, keen to please, bit of a people pleaser, which has its good sides and its downside. So I was quite a rebel, but I was quite a quiet rebel. So I was quite a secretive rebel. But I ticked all the boxes and did everything that was expected of me and more. And funnily enough, I went back to my secondary school a few weeks ago, the first time I'd ever been back, and they had a reunion. I think it was the school's 70th birthday. They had this big reunion. There was lots of us there from my year group, and it was actually 30 years since we left. So it was kind of a moment to go back. And we went back to our film class, and we're macking about in where we were sort of in year 10 actually. And the school used to do music and drama festivals every year, and the forms had to sort of compete against each other to put on a performance. And I'm a big musician, so I was always keen on that one. but I was also form captain several times. So that leadership was definitely there. And I distinctly remember standing at the door one playtime, literally with my arms kind of across the door, stopping everybody leaving in order that they would stay in and practice this blooming song that we were doing for the music festival. So I was laughing with everybody about a kind of quite a direct style of leadership, which was like barring the door to stop everybody leaving so that we can practice whatever it was that we were supposed to be doing. So
that sounds like that sounds like some students' worst nightmare. I guess you were already the organisational powerhouse, even aged 16.
Yeah.
I'm sure that along the way with all of this and working in education through your career, it's definitely not always been easy. And I'm sure there are plenty of tough moments, but perhaps some of the, maybe there's a particular challenge or toughest moment that you'd be happy to share.
Yeah, and there are a lot. I've share one, an early one of really having tough feedback. When I was first a head teacher, I was 29, which it was quite unusual then. This is back in 2006. It was pretty unusual, still relatively unusual, but much more common now. And took on Surrey Square, which is a very, very complex community, and it was needed an awful lot of things to make it better. And when you start changing things, of course, you ruffle feathers, and there were stones that had been unturned in that school community for many, 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 many years. And I had a real campaign against me from a few people. And to this day, I don't really know who they were because it was all anonymous. And I had a pretty vicious series of letters written to the local authority about me, complaining anonymously. And I was understandably, and I remember my school improvement advisor then sort of, saying, oh, look, we've had these letters and we need to talk to you about it kind of thing. And me being terribly upset and her saying to me, oh, this is your first one. This is your first one. And it was like, yeah, it was my first one of like that, somebody in the community who's upset and, does that sort of thing. And I tell that story because I've had lots more. We all have like in parental complaints and stuff and social media stuff is a huge thing that leaders are dealing with in the system. And so telling that story of, that was my first one. She had the wisdom to know, look, it's not you. It's not personal. It's not the first. It might be the first, but it's definitely not the last. These things happen. And that kind of stabilizing advice for me at that point was really helpful. So I think just the sort of people listening, that I think that's a nice bit of sort of advice, as it were, to pass on, which is, it's not you. It's not personal. It happens. When you're changing things, it upsets people. You're lifting up stones. You're upsetting the status quo of little arrangements that people had or things that suited people's self-interest. And obviously with social media now, that gets amplified all the more.
Well, thank you. That's a lovely thing to share. What I really hear from that is this kind of calm, steady ship that just has to push through whatever the weather. And I'm sure it makes the big moments and the better moments even more powerful when you've felt that sense of resilience. So maybe to move by contrast, has there been an Everest or a peak, or is it a collection of small moments?
Yeah, and I will say that I just wanted to build one thing, if I may, briefly about that point about, I like your ship metaphor and feeling steady. And like I don't always feel steady. I don't always still feel steady, and I don't think most people do. I think so for me, kind of allowing and acknowledging and accepting all the feelings is a really important part of that. So sometimes I don't feel okay. Sometimes I do feel wobbly, or sometimes I might feel stressed or feel angry or pissed off or sorry, I just swore. And sometimes I feel excited, and all those things are welcome. So for me, that capacity, developing our capacity as leaders to allow the emotions, to feel the emotions, and then to understand them, and then act informed by those emotions, which is what emotional intelligence is all about, is absolutely critical. And that one thing I feel zealous about supporting better in the system and helping leaders get better at is allowing ourselves to feel the feelings and giving ourselves the space to process them in ways that mean they can inform our action, rather than us being kind of driven by those emotions sort of suppressed or feeling that we have to hide them. So the thing about the ship, it's like, yes, you can look like it's sort of, you can take the swan metaphor of, you're gliding along, but the feet are paddling, and that's okay. You don't have to always be on, your best form, and it's okay to be not perfect. So And the other thing, just to build on that, one of the things that being essentially I'm a big softie, I live with my heart, although I do embody head, heart and hand leadership, and I work really hard to balance that. And I think if you don't have the heart, then the head and the hand, end up being a bit distorted. So I am a highly emotional person, as actually we all are highly emotional people if we allow ourselves to be. So getting that sort of tough feedback, dealing with tough, difficult things, it's easy to harden up. And I feel that as a woman as well, that sort of get into sort of like slightly fighty, kind of militaristic, sort of put your game face on, or this sort of hardening, armoring kind of language, which for me is just really not what I want to be like as a person. So the metaphor that I use for myself in my own leadership is being like silk, which is soft, flowing, and beautiful. I don't mean that in a conceited way, but sort of aiming for beauty in life and goodness and humanity. And it's also bloody strong, so you try and rip up a piece of silk, it's very strong. So I'm not saying everyone has to think of themselves like silk, but finding your own metaphor for your own language, your own leadership, I think is really, really important. That kind of what works for you, what's authentically you, and that as we try to shift the paradigm of how we're thinking about education and how we think about leadership, re-challenging, rethinking about the metaphors and some of the kind of some assumed kind of archetypes about what leaders look like, what they do and how they present themselves, I think is really important, which is why I think I talk about this openly, because I think it's important that as a woman, as a mum, etc., that I am part of helping change the way we think about it.
Beautifully expressed. And now I got to push you back to your best moment.
The best moment. Gosh,
you got to give me an Everest or a peak.
Look, there's lots of things, and there's kind of big, loud, obvious things. So there's some big, loud, obvious things in terms of like the site at Surrey Square. So I led some fairly amazing pieces of work to build some amazing new buildings there. Through hustling, creating a dream, creating a vision, and raising and selling a bit of land. And we built a stunning kind of dining pavilion, and we built an absolutely gorgeous nursery building, including a 2-year-old provision, which is quite what that community deserves. And they were previously in the most disgusting Portakabins that you wouldn't let your dog play in. So that as a sort of physical metaphor of high aspiration, yes, this community deserves the very best, and being very kind of creative and entrepreneurial about how do you raise, 2.5 million to do that. Though there's some very sort of obvious, tangible, proud moments. But to be completely honest with you, having a coaching method mindset, what I'm really interested in is building capacity in other people. I'm interested in how we as schools help build capacity in young people, which is how they think for themselves, create their own internal capabilities, which talks to, we talked about values-led leadership. That's why values are so powerful, because they create a framework within which young people learn how to make good decisions without just telling them what to do all the time. So it creates a scaffolded space for them to enact their agency and their active engagement about thinking about their conduct and their choices, right? So I'm all about building capacity with students, and then increasingly, because most of my time is with adults rather than children. So if you are committed to that methodology of really wanting to empower others, create agency and create capacity, for me, one of the most joyful things is, as I would put it, being quietly pleased and proud in the background when other people are enacting and doing amazing things because of the capacities that you've supported them to build. Right. So that's a very kind of quiet thing. And I could give you so I would want to talk about the amazing things that other people are doing that I've played a part in supporting them with their own leadership and their own vision and development and capabilities to do those great things.
You've expressed that really well. I think there's a lovely balance there between the two. It's like and what's ongoing and those little peaks. Those peaks are the obvious like buzz moments, right? But then there's everything that underpins that's so much more satisfying and value adding for the long term.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. We are always interested in sharing some content suggestions. So I don't know if you're a big reader or a watcher or a listener. You might have to tell us first how you kind of digest your content, and then any steer. It doesn't matter if it's education based or not. Would be thrilled to hear what's keeping you busy.
Yeah. Yeah, great. So I've got really into Sherlock Holmes. I'm not particularly suggesting that anyone gets, but that has been interesting actually. My
Love
young
that.
daughter, who's 10, has just had an autism diagnosis, and she does have like special interests and sort of obsessive interests, which has hitherto been mushrooms. So I don't know quite a lot about mushrooms and fungi, but she's now got completely obsessed with Sherlock, and she's also obsessed with Big Bang Theory, which is interesting from the point of view of kind of thinking about autism and role models, because of course Sheldon in Big Bang is clearly a person with autism who she's obsessed with, and Sherlock Holmes, when you think about it, is quite clearly a person with autism, who has a sort of eidetic memory and obsessive, sort of obsesses over detail. So that's kind of interesting that she's sort of identified those characters. And yeah, I think listening to all the Sherlock Holmes, so there's Stephen Fry audiobook of them, which we listen to a lot, and the Benedict Cumberbatch TV series. But because I suppose what's interesting about that has been making me think about noticing and being present and really, really noticing. Because of course, the whole thing about Sherlock Holmes is there's no magic. It's noticing and making deductions and meaning making from that. So I've been noticing that myself, that I'm really noticing and giving yourself the space to do that and to access the information that's there. So this whole thing isn't there about from sort of NLP, about how we processing or cognitive load theory, but we just can't deal with, there's so much. As I look at you and look at my desk and all my things, I'm zoning out so much information all the time in order to be able to have the space to process. And that kind of Sherlock thing, I suppose, is sort of undoing that process, which is stopping yourself blocking out things and actually being attentive and noticing to many more details that are readily available to us should we choose to tune into them. So that's a slightly left field suggestion. In terms of sort of as I look at my bookshelf here, which is why I'm looking up to my left, of the books that I go to again and again in terms of thinking about leadership and culture, it's the Lalu Reinventing Organizations, which I just think I just agree with it, Matt, hugely, and is what I am trying to enact and do, which is about how do we go beyond hierarchy and think about agency within leadership and organizations in ways that is coherent, that creates coherence, internal coherence and collegiality, but moves beyond some of the constraints and unintended but toxic consequences of a more top-down hierarchical approach. So that I could go on about that, but that is just, if you haven't read it, completely and utterly readable. And the other one that goes alongside that was two really, but similarly, the Amy Edmondson Fearless Organisation and Psychological Safety, and which has such big implications for DEIB and inclusion, how we hear different voices, how do we create a space to hear the voices and all the voices, and that then goes alongside the Matthew Syed stuff about rebel ideas and what do we do. So if we create the psychological safety to hear all the different ideas, what the Syed stuff helps is okay, well, what do we do? Because that's quite challenging. It's like, oh, okay, well, there's 10 people here, we all think something different. We face that reality, then we have to think skillfully about, well, how do we then decide what the hell to do whilst holding all those things? And that to me is intensely interesting from a kind of leadership perspective. And how do we work with groups of people that we can get stuff done and move forward and make progress whilst allowing for the fact that, yeah, we do all think something different or slightly different, because as I would sometimes put it, what's the point of me paying two of you if you both think the same thing? It's like, well,
yeah. That's a lovely spread. I didn't think we'd get from Sherlock Holmes to Matthew Syed and everything in between.
Good,
so
okay, good.
I appreciate that. We've had we've had really good balance. We're running out of time slightly, but we got 2 or 3 more minutes, and I'd love to ask you a couple more questions. My first question is there, I mean, everyone's got some kind of controversial or unpopular opinion, but something you're happy to stand up behind that perhaps you think might ruffle feathers for a few people?
Yeah, look, probably this is really controversial in the current climate, but it's probably about independent schools, and that it's easy to just look through the lens of the Eton and the Harrow, and that there are a lot of even there are the thing is the independent sector has been acting as research and development space for the sector, because it's been so constrained in the state sector in recent years that it's been very hard to innovate. We've been innovating, it's blooming difficult, and not that many people are up for doing things that are outside of the standard, Ofsted criteria kind of thing. And actually, there's a lot of really interesting, innovative work going on in independent schools in terms of curriculum assessment, in terms of culture. And yes, they're privileged, and yes, I am a socialist, and I believe in equity, and I believe in a systems thinking, i.e., we need to include everything that is. So they are part of the system, and they are doing, not all of them, but many of them are doing very interesting work on that kind of innovation agenda. So how might we galvanise the capabilities and the capacities of those schools as to integrate them more into being a whole system? I think is an interesting question. So yeah, that's definitely
really interesting. I didn't think you were going to say that, and I'm fascinated that you have the innovation angle on that debate is one that I've not heard as much of, interestingly, and I think is an interesting one. Do you think it will push through as an argument, or do you think this is a foregone conclusion?
I think it's a foregone conclusion as a headline, and at this point, Labour are trying to win an election, and they've said it, and they're not going to roll back on it at this point. I think potentially, should they be successful in forming the next government, I think there's maybe conversations to look around the edges of some of that, and seeing beyond the obvious kind of grotesque privilege and all the stuff that's been coming out about playing fields and access. I mean, it's completely indefensible, and it is the reality we're starting from. So, yeah, I mean, I think that innovation lens is important, and it's been a bit of a lung to the system where it's been so constrained, and it's not saying everything, because it's possible in that kind of context is easily just translatable across, but actually some of it is. And so I think, yeah, that's a very challenging conversation in the current climate. And I understand why the Labour Party is doing what it's doing. And it's about, I think that the nuance that has been shown in what we've seen in the Labour manifesto, I feel very positive about in general, because it does feel like it's taking a kind of integrative spiral approach of let's keep what's good, let's cut where we've gone a bit too far on some things, and let's make space for new. And the word innovative is in the manifesto in relation to the curriculum. So that I think that seems like a mature and responsible and ethical approach to thinking about the next phase of policy development, as opposed to the slash and burn that happened in 2010, which was let's just burn everything down, including lots of institutions, and lots of very good knowledge and expertise of the system was destroyed and lost at that time. So completely non-party political, of course.
Thank you. No, thank you. A really well explained and interesting angle on that. So thank you. And very finally, as pithy as you can, maybe a piece of advice for someone developing their own career in the sector. And I say the sector because it doesn't have to be in a school per se, but if you're an interested educationalist, what would you be doing?
Find the people you can work with. That's my advice. So the system is so complex, so fragmented. There's some pretty things that I find really horrendous going on in some places. So it's all there. You'll find your place within it. But find the people, find the culture which works for you to develop and flourish, and come and stay in this brilliant, amazing sector, because it is the best chance we've got of changing the world. So
yeah, I'm right with you. Well, on that note, it's been a genuinely fascinating interview for me. I've really enjoyed it. You speak so eloquently on a real diverse, group of topics, and your own experience, and a bit of an insight into home life with Stephen Fry on the audiobooks too. So I'm really, really grateful, and we wish you well in the months to come and all the development that no doubt the organisation's got coming ahead of it. So thank you.
Thanks so much. Lovely to talk to you.